In the bustling heart of New York City, Mark Benioff, the charismatic CEO of Salesforce, epitomized success. His towering presence and infectious energy had transformed Salesforce into a global powerhouse, revolutionizing the tech industry. Despite his professional triumphs, Mark's personal life remained relatively private, with few aware of the complexities that lay beneath his confident exterior. Years earlier, during a business trip to the quaint town of Lambertville, New Jersey, Mark had met Barbara Corcoran, a dynamic entrepreneur known for her real estate empire and her role on Shark Tank. Their brief but passionate relationship ended amicably as their careers took them in different directions. Barbara, always the resilient optimist, discovered she was pregnant shortly after their separation. Choosing to embrace motherhood on her own terms, she welcomed twin daughters Lily and Emma into the world. Balancing her thriving career with single parenthood, Barbara instilled in her daughters the values of independence, ambition, and kindness. She chose not to inform Mark about the children, believing it best given their divergent paths and his relentless focus on his burgeoning company. Years later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Mark found himself in Lambertville once more, seeking a brief respite from his high-octane lifestyle. The town's charm had always appealed to him, offering a stark contrast to the relentless pace of New York City. As he strolled through the historic streets, he noticed two young girls attempting to purchase sodas from a local vendor, their pockets turned out in a theatrical display of disappointment. Amused and touched by their predicament, Mark approached and offered to buy the drinks. Lily and Emma, with their mother's vivacious spirit, engaged him in lively conversation, sharing stories of their school adventures and dreams. Mark felt an inexplicable connection to the twins, their energy and curiosity resonating deeply with him. Unbeknownst to Mark, Barbara watched the interaction from a distance, her heart pounding. Recognizing Mark instantly, she was torn between revealing the truth and maintaining the life she had built for her family. As Mark bid farewell to the girls, promising to visit the town again, Barbara resolved to keep their past concealed, fearing the potential upheaval it could cause. Back in New York, Mark couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. The twins' laughter and the warmth of their conversation lingered, prompting him to reflect on his own life choices and the sacrifices he had made for success. Meanwhile, Lily and Emma excitedly recounted their meeting with the kind stranger, to Barbara, unaware of the profound implications. As days turned into weeks, Mark's thoughts frequently drifted back to Lambertville. He found himself drawn to the town's simplicity and the genuine connections he had experienced, a stark contrast to the often superficial interactions in his corporate world. Determined to explore this newfound yearning for authenticity, Mark planned another visit, setting in motion a series of events that would intertwine his destiny with that of Barbara, Lily, and Emma in ways none of them could have anticipated. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Barbara Corcoran had spent years mastering the art of composure. As one of the most successful self-made women in America, she had built a real estate empire from scratch, turned herself into a television personality on Shark Tank, and raised two beautiful daughters without ever looking back. But that afternoon in Lambertville, New Jersey, as she watched Mark Benioff, one of the most powerful tech moguls in the world, hand sodas to Lily and Emma, her carefully constructed world wobbled. She had always known this moment might come, yet she had never truly prepared for it. She had convinced herself that Mark, absorbed in his high-flying career, would never cross paths with them. But here he was, standing just a few feet away from her daughters, unknowingly playing the role of a kind stranger, while she stood frozen in time, battling the ghosts of her past. The girls, completely oblivious to the significance of their encounter, chattered excitedly as they walked back home. "Mom, you should have seen him. He was super nice and even said he liked my Yankees cap," Emma gushed. "Yeah. And he told us he grew up in San Francisco but loves small towns like this," Lily added. Barbara forced a smile, nodding as if their words were just another anecdote from their day. Inside, however, she felt the weight of a decade's worth of secrets pressing against her chest. She had never told Mark about the pregnancy. At the time, she had rationalized it as protecting both herself and the children. They had been on entirely different trajectories. He was launching Salesforce, working day and night to revolutionize the tech world. She was fighting to establish her name in New York's ruthless real estate market. They had been two comets burning too fast, bound to part ways. But standing in her kitchen that evening, stirring a pot of pasta while her daughters giggled about their mysterious benefactor, she wondered if she had made a mistake. What if Mark would have been a great father? What if he had wanted to be there? What if he deserved to know? She shook the thoughts away. It was too late. Telling him now would only complicate everything. He had his life and they had theirs. Meanwhile, back in New York City, Mark found himself unusually distracted. His entire career had been built on laser focus, on the ability to tune out distractions and chase success with relentless energy. But for some reason, his mind kept drifting back to those two little girls. There was something about them, something familiar, something he couldn't quite place. Their eyes, their smiles, the way they spoke with confidence beyond their years. It nagged at him in a way he wasn't used to. "You're distracted," his assistant Elizabeth noted as she placed a stack of reports on his desk at the Salesforce headquarters. "Me? No way," Mark said, shaking his head. "I don't get distracted." Elizabeth smirked. "Right. That's why you just signed the same document twice." Mark glanced down and realized she was right. He chuckled, rubbing his temples. "I met these two kids in Lambertville. Just nice kids. They reminded me of something, but I can't put my finger on it." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "You? Thinking about kids? That's a first." Mark shrugged. "I don't know. Just got me thinking." That night, Mark did something he rarely did. He sat in his apartment overlooking Central Park and thought about the past. About Barbara. They had been young, ambitious, and wildly in love for a brief moment in time. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, fearless, sharp-witted, determined to carve out her own destiny. When they parted ways, it wasn't with bitterness but with an unspoken understanding that their worlds were moving too fast in opposite directions. He had never looked back. Until now. Barbara, on the other hand, couldn't stop looking over her shoulder. Over the next few days, she found herself hyper-aware of her surroundings, as if Mark might reappear at any moment. It was ridiculous, she told herself. He had no reason to suspect anything. To him, the girls were just two random kids. But still, she found herself checking the local coffee shop before stepping inside, glancing around at the farmer's market, making sure she wasn't caught off guard. Then, just as she was beginning to relax, she received an email that made her heart stop. Subject: Investment Opportunity, Salesforce Community Development Initiative. Barbara had been looking for investors for a new real estate project, a series of sustainable housing developments designed for single mothers. It was her passion project, something deeply personal. She had applied for funding through several programs, including a corporate initiative that partnered with major firms. She had submitted the application weeks ago and hadn't expected much. Now, as she stared at the email, she realized that the initiative was backed by Salesforce. By Mark's company. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clicked open the details. The email was from a Salesforce executive, inviting her to a meeting in New York to discuss her proposal. There was no mention of Mark directly, but his fingerprints were all over it. If she accepted the meeting, she would be walking straight into his world again. She closed her laptop and pressed her hands against her temples. This was too much. First the chance encounter with the girls and now this? It felt as if fate was pulling her back into Mark's orbit. But why? Lily and Emma bounded into the room, arguing over whose turn it was to pick the movie for their Friday night tradition. Barbara looked at them, her heart swelling with love and fear at the same time. Could she keep them safe from the past? Or was the past about to catch up with all of them? Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Barbara had always prided herself on being able to handle any situation with composure. She had built a real estate empire from nothing, navigated the cutthroat world of business, and raised two daughters without anyone's help. But as she sat in her home office in Lambertville, staring at the email inviting her to meet with Salesforce executives in New York, she felt something she hadn't in years: panic. She knew the moment she stepped into that meeting, she would be walking into Mark Benioff's world again. And she had spent over a decade keeping her daughters far away from that world. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Salesforce was a massive company, and this investment initiative was likely handled by a team. Mark himself probably didn't even know her proposal had crossed his company's desk. She could go, keep it professional, and walk away with the funding she needed for her housing project. No personal history needed. But deep down she knew it wasn't that simple. The next morning she drove into New York City, the skyline rising ahead of her like a reminder of the past she had tried to outrun. She had spent years in this city, clawing her way to the top of the real estate market, proving herself in a world dominated by men. It was where she had met Mark in a chance encounter at a business conference. She had been drawn to his confidence, his larger-than-life personality, the way he could fill a room with energy. They had spent months caught up in an intense whirlwind of late-night conversations, shared ambitions, and plans for the future that never quite aligned. When they parted ways, it wasn't out of anger but necessity. He was consumed by Salesforce, and she was determined to make a name for herself without being anyone's shadow. And then, of course, there was the one thing he never knew, the daughter she had carried alone, the girls who had become her entire world. Barbara parked near Bryant Park, taking a moment to collect herself before heading into the Salesforce tower. The lobby was sleek and modern, filled with professionals in tailored suits, their voices a steady hum of productivity. She checked in at the front desk, receiving a visitor's badge before being escorted upstairs. The executive boardroom was lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of the city she had once called home. Several team members were already seated, but it wasn't until she stepped inside that she saw him. Mark Benioff stood at the far end of the room, reviewing notes on his tablet. The moment he looked up and met her gaze, time seemed to freeze. His expression shifted from polite curiosity to pure shock. "Barbara?" he said, his deep voice carrying across the room. For a split second, neither of them moved. Then, regaining her composure, Barbara smiled, slipping into her business persona like a shield. "Mark. It's been a long time." Mark blinked, clearly trying to process the situation. I had no idea you were the one behind this proposal." He gestured for her to take a seat. "This is unexpected." She sat down, keeping her posture relaxed even though her heart was racing. "I didn't realize this initiative was connected to you," she lied smoothly. "But I appreciate the opportunity to discuss it." The meeting went on, with Barbara presenting her vision for affordable housing developments tailored to single mothers. She was articulate, passionate, and precise, exactly as she had always been. But every time she glanced at Mark, she saw the unspoken questions in his eyes. He was listening, but his mind was clearly somewhere else. When the meeting concluded, the other executives filed out, leaving only the two of them in the glass-walled room. Mark leaned against the conference table, studying her with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something unreadable. "I can't believe this," he said finally. "After all these years." Barbara forced a small laugh. "Life has a way of bringing people back together in the most unexpected ways." Mark folded his arms. "And yet you never reached out." She exhaled slowly. "We both moved on. You had your world, I had mine." He studied her for a long moment. "Is that really all there is to it?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a text from Lily. "Mom, can we have pizza tonight?" A simple, everyday message, but at that moment, it felt like a ticking bomb in her hands. She quickly locked the screen before Mark could see. He raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said, standing up. "Listen, Mark, this was great. And I appreciate the opportunity. But this doesn't have to be personal." Mark watched her closely. "Doesn't it?" She gave him one last measured smile before walking toward the door. "Take care, Mark." She made it to the elevator before she allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pressed the button for the lobby. She had handled it. She had kept control. But she knew deep in her bones that Mark wasn't going to let this go. Mark stood in the empty boardroom for several minutes after she left, replaying every moment in his mind. Seeing Barbara again had been like opening a door he thought had been permanently sealed. And something about the way she had reacted, her carefully guarded words, her rushed exit, made him certain that there was more to the story. Back in Lambertville, Barbara walked into her home and was immediately tackled by Lily and Emma, both of them talking over each other about their day. She forced herself to be present, to push thoughts of Mark away. But later that night, as she stood in the kitchen washing dishes, she caught her reflection in the window. She looked the same as always, strong, composed, in control. But inside, she knew everything was about to change. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark Benioff sat in his penthouse office at the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, staring at his laptop, but his mind was thousands of miles away in New Jersey. He had spent the last 24 hours trying to focus on work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Barbara. Seeing her again after all these years had shaken him more than he cared to admit. She had always been a force of nature, driven, intelligent, and fiercely independent. That was what had drawn him to her in the first place. But something about her had seemed different now. She was still composed, still sharp, but there had been something in her eyes when she looked at him. A flicker of hesitation, of something unspoken. He had spent his entire career trusting his instincts, and right now, his instincts told him that Barbara was keeping something from him. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It wasn't like him to dwell on the past. He had built an empire by looking forward, not backward. But this wasn't just about an old flame. There was something more here, and he needed to find out what it was. Barbara, on the other hand, had spent the day trying to keep her routine as normal as possible. She had gone to the office, checked in on construction sites and attended meetings. But no matter how much she tried to focus, the image of Mark's face when he had seen her kept replaying in her mind. She had thought she was prepared for this. She had convinced herself that if she ever ran into him again, she would handle it with the same level-headedness that had gotten her through the toughest years of her life. But seeing him had stirred up emotions she had buried long ago. And now, she was afraid those emotions would lead to questions she wasn't ready to answer. She glanced at her daughters as they sat on the couch watching a movie. Lily at 10 was the spitting image of her, while Emma at 8 had Mark's piercing blue eyes. She had always told herself that keeping them away from him had been the right decision. Mark had been consumed by his work, by his vision for Salesforce. She had been nothing more than a moment in his journey, a detour he had long since forgotten. But seeing him again had made her question everything. Meanwhile, Mark had started to do what he did best, digging. He called an old friend in the real estate business and casually asked about Barbara's company. "She's doing well," his friend said. "Built a solid reputation. Smart as hell, tough negotiator. But you know what's interesting? She's a single mom. 2 kids, I think. Never talks about the father." Mark felt his stomach drop. He ended the call and sat in silence, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The timeline. The secrecy. The way Barbara had reacted when she saw him. Could it be possible? He wasn't sure what he hoped the answer would be, but he knew he couldn't ignore the possibility. That weekend, Barbara took the girls to a small cafe in Princeton for lunch. They were laughing over milkshakes when Lily suddenly nudged her. "Mom, that guy is staring at us." Barbara turned and her breath caught in her throat. Mark was standing near the entrance watching them. She felt a wave of panic rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had spent years preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she had no idea what to do. Mark approached the table slowly, his expression unreadable. "Barbara," he said, his voice steady but filled with something deeper. She swallowed hard. "Mark, this is unexpected." He glanced at the girls and for a moment he just stared. Lily and Emma looked back at him curiously, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Finally he turned back to Barbara. "Can we talk?" Barbara knew she had no choice. She nodded toward the girls. "Give me a minute, okay?" She stood and led Mark outside, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low. Mark exhaled. "I had to see you. I had to ask. Those girls, are they mine?" Barbara felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. She had spent years avoiding this exact conversation, and now it was happening in the middle of a cafe parking lot. She wanted to lie, to push him away, to keep things as they were. But looking into his eyes, she knew she couldn't. "Yes," she finally admitted. "They're yours." Mark took a step back as if the words had physically hit him. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what he had just heard. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Barbara crossed her arms, her emotions swirling. "Because you were never meant to be a father. You were building your empire, Mark. I knew if I told you, you'd either feel obligated to be involved or you'd walk away. Either way, I couldn't take that risk. So I made the choice for you." Mark shook his head in disbelief. "That wasn't your choice to make." Barbara felt anger flare up. "Maybe not. But I did what I thought was best for them." Mark exhaled sharply. "I missed 10 years of their lives, Barbara. 10 years. She softened slightly. "And if I had told you, what would have changed? Would you have left Salesforce? Would you have been there for every late-night fever, every school recital?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. Maybe she was right. Maybe he would have failed them. But that didn't change the fact that they were his daughters, and he had never even known they existed. Finally, he looked at her, determination in his eyes. "I want to meet them. I want to know them." Barbara hesitated. She had spent years protecting them from this exact situation. But deep down she knew she couldn't keep the truth from them forever. "I don't know, Mark. I need time to think." He nodded slowly. "I get that. But I'm not walking away from this. Not this time." Barbara watched as he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with 1,000 emotions battling inside her. She had spent years convincing herself she had done the right thing. But now, for the first time, she wasn't so sure. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Barbara spent the rest of the day in a daze, her mind replaying every word of her conversation with Mark. She had always known this moment might come, but she had never truly prepared for it. She had convinced herself that keeping the truth from him had been the best decision. For herself, for him, and most importantly for the girls. But now, after seeing the raw emotion in his eyes, she wasn't so sure. That night, after putting Lily and Emma to bed, she sat alone in the living room, nursing a cup of tea. The house was quiet, but her thoughts were deafening. She remembered the day she had found out she was pregnant, the fear and uncertainty that had gripped her. Mark had been on the brink of something great, and she hadn't wanted to be the one to derail his dreams. And so she had walked away. But had she really done the right thing? Or had she just been too scared to face the truth? Mark, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. He sat in his office at home, staring out the window at the San Francisco skyline. The city that had been his entire world for so long now felt small compared to what he had just discovered. He had 2 daughters. Daughters he had never met, never held, never known existed. The realization was overwhelming. He had built his life around control, around strategy and precision. But this was chaos. And yet he couldn't walk away. He had missed a decade of their lives, but he wasn't going to miss another day if he could help it. He picked up his phone and, after a long moment of hesitation, called Barbara. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice quiet and wary. "Mark, it's late." "I know," he said, rubbing his forehead. "But I can't stop thinking about this. About them." Barbara sighed. "I don't know what you want me to say." "Say that I can see them," Mark said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Say that I can be part of their lives." Silence stretched between them. Finally Barbara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do this, Mark." He closed his eyes. "Neither do I. But we'll figure it out." After a long pause she said, "I need time. And I need to talk to them first." "Okay," Mark said, gripping the phone. "But don't shut me out, Barbara. Please." She didn't respond right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "I won't. I promise." The next morning Barbara woke up with a knot in her stomach. She had to tell the girls. She had spent years crafting a life for them that didn't include Mark Benioff, and now, in an instant, everything was about to change. She waited until they were all sitting at the breakfast table before she took a deep breath. "Girls," she said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you." Lily looked up from her cereal, her blue eyes curious. "What is it, Mom?" Barbara hesitated, then forced herself to push forward. "You know how you've always asked about your dad?" Emma sat up straighter. "Yeah." Barbara swallowed. "Well, I saw him yesterday." The room went silent. Then Lily frowned. "Wait, what?" Barbara nodded. "His name is Mark Benioff. He didn't know about you before, but now he does. And he wants to meet you." Emma's eyes widened. "Our dad is alive?" Barbara felt a pang in her chest. "Yes, sweetheart. He's alive. He's been busy with his work, but he's a good man." Lily, always the more cautious of the two, crossed her arms. "Why didn't he know about us before?" Barbara sighed. "Because I didn't tell him." "Why not?" Emma asked, her voice small. Barbara reached across the table, taking their hands in hers. "Because I thought I was doing the right thing. But now I think you both deserve to know him. And he deserves to know you." Lily still looked skeptical, but Emma's face lit up with curiosity. "When can we meet him?" Barbara hesitated. "If you're ready, I can set something up." Emma nodded eagerly, but Lily remained quiet. Barbara knew this was going to be difficult, but it was a step they had to take. That afternoon she sent Mark a message. "They're ready to meet you." His reply came almost instantly. "When and where?" 2 days later they met at a quiet park in Princeton. Barbara had chosen the location carefully, somewhere neutral, somewhere familiar. The girls were nervous but excited, and Barbara's heart pounded as she saw Mark approaching. He looked different today, not the confident CEO but a man who was stepping into unknown territory. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the 2 little girls in front of him. Lily and Emma stared back at him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Finally Mark crouched down to their level, his voice soft. "Hi. I'm Mark." Emma was the first to speak. "You're our dad." Mark smiled, though his eyes were glassy. "Yeah, I am. And I'm really happy to meet you." Lily studied him carefully. "Mom said you didn't know about us." Mark nodded. "That's true. But I do now. And I'd really like to get to know you if you'll let me." Emma grinned. "Do you like ice cream?" Mark chuckled. "I love ice cream." "Then you can stay," she declared. Barbara watched as Mark smiled, relief washing over his face. Lily was still guarded, but Barbara could see her warming up, little by little. It was going to take time. But for the first time in years she felt like they were finally moving forward. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark sat in his office at Salesforce Tower, staring out at the San Francisco skyline, but for the first time in his life, the view didn't excite him. The glass walls, the polished wood desk, the empire he had built, none of it seemed as important as it had just days ago. His mind kept drifting back to Lily and Emma, the two little girls who had turned his world upside down. Emma had accepted him so easily, as if she had been waiting for him all her life. But Lily, she was different. Reserved, cautious, hesitant. He understood why. He was a stranger to her. No amount of money, power, or success could change the fact that he had missed the first 10 years of their lives. And now he had to prove himself to them, to their mother, and maybe even to himself. Barbara had agreed to let him see them again, but this time she wouldn't be there. It was an important step. He had to show the girls that he wasn't just some businessman dropping in for a quick visit. He had to be more than that. So he planned a simple day out. Nothing extravagant, nothing overwhelming. Just a father and his daughters spending time together. When Saturday arrived, Mark drove to Princeton to pick them up. He had never felt so nervous in his life. The boardrooms, the press conferences, the high-stakes negotiations. None of them compared to the anxiety of knocking on Barbara's front door, waiting for his daughters to greet him. When the door opened, Emma's face lit up. "Hi, Dad." She said the word so easily, so naturally, that it made his chest tighten. "Hi, sweetheart," he said, smiling. Lily appeared behind her, quieter, more reserved. She gave him a small nod. "Hey." Mark met her gaze. "You ready to go?" Emma nodded excitedly, but Lily hesitated. "Where are we going?" she asked. Mark had thought about this a lot. He knew he had to start slow, find common ground. "I thought we could go to Central Park," he said. "Walk around, maybe get some ice cream." Emma clapped her hands. "Yes, ice cream." Lily studied him for a moment before nodding. "Okay." They drove into the city, the car ride filled with Emma's chatter. She had a million questions. "What's your favorite color? Do you have any pets? Have you ever been to Disneyland?" Mark answered them all, feeling warmth spread through him with every moment. But Lily remained quiet, staring out the window, lost in thought. When they reached Central Park, they started with a walk. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, leaves turning golden, the scent of roasted nuts from a nearby vendor. Mark kept the conversation light, letting Emma lead while giving Lily space. Slowly, she started engaging, asking small questions, testing the waters. They stopped for ice cream, sitting on a bench as they ate. Emma was all smiles, but Lily kept sneaking glances at him as if trying to figure him out. Finally she spoke. "So, you run a company?" Mark nodded. "Yeah. Salesforce. We help businesses stay connected with their customers." Lily frowned. "That sounds boring." Emma giggled and Mark laughed too. "It can be," he admitted. "But I like solving problems." Lily licked her ice cream thoughtfully. "So, if you're so busy, how do we fit in?" The question caught him off guard. He put his cone down and turned to her, meeting her gaze seriously. "You come first now," he said. "I know I wasn't there before and I can't change that. But I want to be here now. If you let me." Lily didn't respond right away, but he saw something shift in her expression. A crack in the wall she had built. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the park, renting bikes, even stopping at the zoo. By the time they returned to Barbara's house, the girls were exhausted but happy. As they got out of the car, Emma hugged him tightly. "Can we do this again?" she asked. Mark felt a lump in his throat. "Of course." Lily hesitated, then gave him a small, shy smile. "Thanks for today," she said. It wasn't much, but to Mark it was everything. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark drove back to San Francisco that night with a strange feeling in his chest. Something between joy and regret. The day had been perfect, or at least as perfect as it could be given the circumstances. Emma had embraced him wholeheartedly, and even Lily had let down her guard, if only slightly. But every moment with them was a reminder of all the moments he had missed. Their first words, their first steps, their birthdays, their scraped knees and bedtime stories, he had been absent for all of it. And no matter how much he wanted to, he could never get that time back. The thought haunted him as he parked his car and stepped into his penthouse, the vast space feeling colder than ever. The sleek furniture, the expensive artwork, the breathtaking view of the Bay Bridge, it all seemed meaningless now. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat by the window, staring out at the city that had once been his entire world. Now it was just a backdrop to the life he had left behind. Barbara, on the other hand, sat on the couch, watching her daughters as they recounted every detail of their day. Emma was animated, her hands waving as she described the ice cream flavors, the zoo animals, the bike ride through Central Park. And then Dad, she paused, grinning at the word, let me pick whatever I wanted from the snack cart. Barbara's heart clenched at the ease with which Emma called him Dad. It was natural, effortless, as if he had been there all along. Lily, however, was quieter. She listened, nodded, added small comments, but Barbara could see the conflict in her eyes. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Lily lingered in the kitchen while Barbara washed the dishes. Mom, she said hesitantly, do you think he really wants to be part of our lives? Barbara turned to face her, drying her hands with a towel. I think he does, sweetheart. He wouldn't be here if he didn't. Lily chewed on her lip. But what if he gets busy again? What if we don't fit into his life? Barbara crouched down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I won't let that happen, she said firmly. And I don't think he will either. Lily nodded, but the uncertainty in her eyes didn't disappear. Barbara knew trust would take time. Over the next few weeks, Mark made every effort to be present. He flew back to Princeton every weekend, sometimes taking the girls out, sometimes just spending time with them at home. He helped Emma with her math homework, listened to Lily talk about the book she was reading, and even learned how to braid their hair. Badly, but he tried. The girls started texting him during the week, Emma sending emojis and silly jokes, Lily asking about his work or his travels. Slowly but surely he was becoming part of their world. One Saturday afternoon he took them to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Emma was fascinated by the dinosaur fossils, while Lily spent most of her time in the Hall of Gems and Minerals, examining each stone with curiosity. Do you like science? Mark asked as she studied a shimmering piece of quartz. Lily nodded. I think so. I like knowing how things work. He smiled. You know, when I was your age, I wanted to be a scientist. She looked at him, surprised. Really? He chuckled. Yeah. But then I realized I liked solving problems more than doing experiments, so I went into business. She considered that. So, you solve problems for companies? Exactly. What if you could solve problems for people instead? The question caught him off guard. He stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's a good question, Lily. After the museum, they grabbed dinner at a small Italian restaurant nearby. As they ate, Emma asked, Dad, do you have a family? The question made Mark pause. He had never really thought about it. His parents had passed away years ago and he had no siblings. His company had been his family for so long. But now, looking at these two little girls, he realized that had changed. I do now, he said softly. Emma beamed, but Lily just watched him, her eyes thoughtful. That night, when he dropped them off, Barbara met him at the door. They had a great time, she said. He smiled. So did I. She hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Mark, I just want to say, thank you. For showing up. For trying. He met her gaze. I missed too much already. I won't miss any more. She nodded, her expression unreadable. Good night, Mark. Good night, Barbara. As he walked back to his car, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark had never been a man to believe in fate. He had built his empire through hard work, persistence, and an almost obsessive drive for success. But now, as he sat in his San Francisco office, staring at a picture of Lily and Emma he had taken during their visit to the American Museum of Natural History, he couldn't shake the feeling that life had led him exactly where he was meant to be. He thought about how Emma had instantly accepted him, how her innocence allowed her to embrace this newfound relationship without hesitation. And then there was Lily, reserved, skeptical, but undeniably curious about him. She tested him in small ways, asking questions, watching his actions rather than his words. He knew she needed proof that he wasn't just another man making empty promises. He had to show her that he was here to stay. That weekend he flew back to New Jersey again, but this time he had a different plan. Instead of taking the girls out, he wanted to be part of their everyday lives. So when he arrived at Barbara's house on Saturday morning, he carried with him not just gifts, but a toolbox. Barbara opened the door and raised an eyebrow. What's this? She asked, nodding at the tools. Mark smiled. You mentioned the girls' bookshelf was wobbly. Thought I'd fix it. She gave him a skeptical look but stepped aside. Be my guest. Inside, Emma ran up to hug him, and even Lily looked surprised to see him with something other than his usual business attire. You know how to use those? She asked, crossing her arms. Guess we'll find out, he replied with a grin. The bookshelf wasn't difficult to fix, but Mark took his time, making sure the girls saw him as more than just a visitor. Emma sat beside him, handing him screws, while Lily hovered nearby, watching closely. So you're handy? Lily asked after a while. Not really, Mark admitted. But I'm good at figuring things out. She nodded thoughtfully as if filing that piece of information away. After fixing the shelf, he stayed for lunch, sitting at the small wooden table where the girls usually ate. It was a simple meal, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, but it felt more important than any five-star dinner he'd ever had. They talked about school, about Emma's upcoming spelling bee, and Lily's latest science project. It was the kind of everyday conversation he had never experienced before, and he found himself treasuring every moment. Later in the afternoon, Lily surprised him by asking if he wanted to see something. He followed her to her room, where she pulled out a shoebox filled with trinkets, rocks she had collected, small science kits, and a few books on astronomy. I like space, she said quietly, running a finger over the cover of one book. I want to go to NASA one day. Mark smiled, touched that she was opening up to him. NASA, huh? That's a big dream. She shrugged. Mom says dreams are worth chasing. He nodded. She's right. And if you want to go to NASA, I'll do everything I can to help you get there. She studied him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. Finally, she gave a small nod. Okay. That evening, when he was getting ready to leave, Barbara walked him to the door. She's warming up to you, she said. Mark exhaled, nodding. Yeah. Slowly. Barbara hesitated, then added, You don't have to keep proving yourself, you know. Just keep showing up. He met her gaze. I will. As he stepped outside, the cool autumn air hit him, but he barely noticed. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark had always believed that time was money, that every second should be spent building something, achieving something. But now, time had taken on a different meaning. It wasn't about deals and board meetings anymore, it was about moments. Small, fleeting moments that he had missed for years but was now trying to reclaim. Every weekend trip to New Jersey was a reminder of just how much he had lost, but also how much he still had the chance to gain. He had started learning the little things about Lily and Emma. Emma loved strawberry ice cream but hated chocolate. Lily always double-checked facts before believing anything. Emma never went to bed without her stuffed bunny, and Lily had a habit of biting her lip when she was nervous. These tiny details, meaningless to anyone else, meant everything to him. One weekend he decided to do something special. Instead of just visiting, he planned a trip for them. He booked tickets for a weekend getaway to Washington, D.C., knowing that Lily would love the Smithsonian museums and Emma would enjoy exploring new places. When he told them about it, Emma was ecstatic, jumping up and down, while Lily simply nodded, though he could see the excitement in her eyes. Barbara hesitated at first but eventually agreed, as long as she could come along to keep an eye on them. Mark had no objections. This trip wasn't just about the girls, it was about all of them finding a way to be a family. They took the Amtrak from Princeton to D.C., the girls excitedly staring out the window as the scenery blurred past. Emma chattered non-stop, making up stories about the places they passed, while Lily sat with her nose buried in a book about space exploration. Mark watched them, feeling a warmth in his chest that he couldn't quite describe. When they arrived, they checked into a hotel near the National Mall, and the adventure began. The first stop was the National Air and Space Museum, where Lily's eyes lit up as she examined the Apollo 11 exhibit. She asked endless questions about space travel, and Mark did his best to keep up, though he found himself promising to read up more so he could give her better answers next time. Emma, on the other hand, was fascinated by the interactive exhibits, dragging Mark from one station to another. The next day they visited the National Zoo, where Emma insisted on seeing the giant pandas first. She squealed in delight as the pandas lazily chewed on bamboo, while Lily took a more observational approach, reading every sign and fact sheet. Mark found himself enjoying every second, from the way Emma grabbed his hand without hesitation to the way Lily slowly started trusting him enough to ask him things directly instead of going through Barbara. By the end of the trip, they were exhausted but happy. On the train ride back, Emma fell asleep with her head on Mark's shoulder, while Lily leaned against the window, lost in thought. At one point she turned to him and said, "This was fun. Thanks, Dad." The word hit him like a shock and he had to blink a few times before responding. "Anytime, Lily." Back in Princeton, as he dropped them off, Barbara pulled him aside. "They had an amazing time," she said softly. "Thank you for doing this." Mark looked at her, realizing just how much she had done on her own for years. "I wish I had been here sooner," he admitted. Barbara nodded. "But you're here now. That's what matters." As he drove back to San Francisco, he realized that for the first time in his life he wasn't dreading leaving, because he knew he would always come back. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark had always thought of home as a place, a physical space filled with things that represented success. His penthouse in San Francisco, the sleek black marble countertops, the priceless art pieces, these were all markers of his achievements. But now, as he sat in a small cafe in Princeton across from Lily and Emma, watching them sip their hot chocolate on a chilly November afternoon, he realized that home wasn't a place at all. It was a feeling, and it was right here. They had just come from a bookstore where he had let them pick out whatever they wanted. Emma had chosen a colorful picture book about sea creatures, while Lily had picked up a thick novel about a girl who wanted to be an astronaut. It didn't surprise him. Lily was determined in a way that reminded him of himself. She never wanted anything halfway, she wanted to understand everything completely. Barbara had gone to run errands, leaving him alone with the girls for a few hours, something that would have seemed impossible just months ago. But now it felt natural. "So," Mark said, taking a sip of his coffee, "what's the best thing about being sisters?" Emma grinned, her cheeks still dusted with chocolate powder from her drink. "Lily always helps me with my homework." Lily rolled her eyes. "That's because you never pay attention in class." Emma stuck her tongue out, and Mark chuckled, watching the easy banter between them. He envied their closeness, the years they had spent together when he hadn't even known they existed. But he was here now, and he was determined to make every moment count. As they finished their drinks, Mark glanced at his watch and realized it was almost time for Emma's ballet class. "Do you mind if I come watch?" he asked hesitantly. Emma's eyes widened. "Really?" Mark nodded. "Of course. If that's okay with you." Emma practically bounced out of her chair in excitement, and even Lily gave a small nod of approval. They walked to the dance studio just a few blocks away, the air crisp with the first signs of winter. Inside, Emma ran off to join the other girls, while Mark and Lily sat on a bench near the window. Lily pulled out her new book and started reading, but after a few minutes she looked up and asked, "Did you ever do anything like this when you were a kid?" Mark hesitated. His childhood had been nothing like this. Growing up in a working-class family in Chicago, there had been no ballet classes, no bookstore trips. His parents had done their best, but money had always been tight, and dreams had taken a backseat to survival. "No," he admitted. "We didn't have the money for stuff like this." Lily studied him as if she were piecing together a puzzle. "So how did you become you?" Mark smiled slightly. "A lot of hard work, a little luck, and never giving up." Lily seemed to consider that, then nodded. "I want to be like that too." Mark felt something tighten in his chest. "You already are." When Emma's class ended, she ran over to them, breathless and glowing with happiness. "Did you see my twirl, Dad?" The word still caught him off guard, but it was the best thing he had ever heard. "I did. It was perfect." Emma beamed, and Mark felt something shift inside him, something permanent. That evening, as he dropped them off at Barbara's house, Lily lingered for a moment before heading inside. "Thanks for today," she said quietly. Mark smiled. "Anytime, Lily." As he drove away, he realized that for the first time in his life he wasn't thinking about work, meetings, or deadlines. He was thinking about the next time he would see them again. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark had always believed that success came from control, controlling his schedule, his decisions, his business empire. But now, as he stood outside Barbara's house in Princeton, watching Lily and Emma through the living room window, he realized that the best things in life were the ones he had never controlled. He had stumbled into fatherhood, completely unprepared, and yet, here he was, feeling more fulfilled than he ever had in a boardroom. It had been months since he found out about his daughters, and in that time, everything had changed. His priorities had shifted, his heart had softened, and for the first time in years, his life had meaning beyond corporate deals and stock prices. Tonight, he had been invited inside for dinner. It was a simple thing. Barbara had said the girls wanted him to stay, and he had agreed without hesitation. But as he walked up the steps, he felt a nervousness he hadn't experienced in years. He was used to high-stakes meetings with billionaires, making split-second decisions that affected thousands of employees, but sitting down for dinner with his daughters and their mother? That was uncharted territory. Barbara opened the door before he could knock, giving him a small smile. "You're early," she said. "Traffic was light," he replied, stepping inside. The house was warm, the smell of home-cooked food filling the air. It was nothing like his sleek, modern penthouse in San Francisco, but it felt more like home than anywhere he had been in years. Lily and Emma ran to greet him, Emma hugging his waist while Lily simply smiled. "We made spaghetti," Emma announced proudly. "And I helped," Lily added, looking at him expectantly. Then I'm sure it'll be the best spaghetti I've ever had, Mark said, following them into the dining room. The table was set simply, and for the first time in years, he sat down for a meal that wasn't served on fine china or in a high-end restaurant. It was a strange feeling sitting there with them, but it was also the most natural thing in the world. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. Emma talked about her ballet class, excitedly explaining a new move she had learned. Lily shared facts about space travel, her passion growing with every word. Mark listened, truly listened, absorbing every detail. He asked questions, engaged with them, and for the first time he felt like a real father. Barbara watched quietly, occasionally adding to the conversation, but mostly letting them have their moment. After dinner, the girls insisted on showing him their favorite board game. They pulled out The Game of Life, laughing as they explained the rules. You have to pick a career, Emma said. And then you go through all these life events. Mark chuckled, selecting a tiny plastic car. I think I've already played this game in real life, he joked. Lily smirked. Yeah, but did you win? Mark paused, looking at them. I think I just did. The game went on for an hour, filled with laughter and playful competition. Emma insisted on being a doctor while Lily became an astronaut. Mark, ironically, ended up with a business career which made everyone laugh. As the night wound down, he realized just how much he had missed out on, but also how much he still had the chance to experience. As he got ready to leave, Emma hugged him tightly. Can you come again tomorrow? She asked. Mark hesitated, looking at Barbara. She gave a small nod. I'll be here, he promised. Lily didn't say anything, but as he turned to go, she quietly said, Good night, Dad. The words still sent a shock through him, but it was the best feeling in the world. As he drove back to his hotel, he realized that his life had truly changed. He wasn't just Mark Weston, the billionaire CEO anymore. He was Lily and Emma's father. And that was the most important title he had ever held. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Mark had spent his entire life chasing success, believing that happiness was measured in wealth, power, and control. But now, as he stood outside Barbara's house in Princeton on a cold December evening, he knew he had been wrong. He had spent the last few months rediscovering himself through Lily and Emma, two little girls who had unknowingly changed his entire world. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, he had come with something important on his mind, something that could redefine everything. Barbara opened the door before he could knock, just as she always did, as if she could sense him standing there. You're early, she said with a small smile, stepping aside to let him in. The house was filled with the warm scent of cinnamon, and a Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments that the girls had proudly shown him the week before. Emma came running toward him, her little feet patting against the hardwood floor. Dad, we're making cookies. Do you want to help? The word Dad still sent a warmth through him that nothing else ever had. Of course, he said, ruffling her hair before following her into the kitchen. Lily was already at the counter, carefully pressing cookie cutters into the dough. She looked up at him with a knowing expression, as if she could tell something was on his mind. They spent the next hour covered in flour and sugar, laughing as Emma insisted on adding extra sprinkles to every cookie while Lily rolled her eyes at her little sister's enthusiasm. Mark had never done anything like this before. His childhood had been filled with financial struggles, and his adulthood had been consumed by work. But now, in this small kitchen in Princeton, he felt something he had never experienced before: peace. As they waited for the cookies to bake, Barbara poured them all hot chocolate, and they sat around the living room, the glow of the Christmas tree illuminating the space. Mark watched as Emma curled up with her cup, her eyelids drooping, while Lily pretended not to be tired, but her blinks were getting slower. This was what he had missed all these years. This was what he had been chasing without even knowing it. Barbara must have sensed the shift in his mood because she spoke softly. What's on your mind, Mark? He took a deep breath, setting his cup down. I've been thinking a lot about what's next, he admitted. For me. For all of us. Barbara tilted her head slightly, waiting for him to continue. I don't want to be a part-time father, he said, his voice steady. I don't want to be a visitor in their lives. I want to be present. I want to be here. Lily's eyes widened slightly, and even Emma, half asleep, perked up. You mean, you're moving here? Emma asked, her voice filled with hope. Mark nodded. Yes. I've already started looking at places in Princeton. I'll still have to travel for work sometimes, but this, he gestured around the room, this is where I want to be. Barbara exhaled softly, as if she had been holding her breath. That's a big decision, she said, though there was no resistance in her voice. I know, Mark said. But it's the right one. Lily stared at him for a long moment before speaking. Are you sure? You love San Francisco. You love your company. Mark smiled. I do. But I love you more. Lily blinked, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her usually composed expression. Okay, she whispered. That was all he needed. Emma, on the other hand, had no hesitation. She threw herself at him, hugging him as tightly as her little arms allowed. Best Christmas ever? She squealed. Barbara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. I guess we should start looking for houses then. Mark met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That night, as he drove back to his hotel one last time, he realized that his life had changed in ways he had never imagined. He had come to Princeton expecting to fulfill an obligation, to do the right thing. Instead, he had found something more valuable than all the success in the world. He had found a family. And this time he wasn't going to let it go. If you have liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.